The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Greetings, everybody. It's time for another week of everything you need to know. I'm Keefer. Glad to be with you on this new week and a whole bunch of new topics here. Well, to call them new topics probably isn't accurate. I really wrestled with several different ideas. I was going to go a little bit different direction and not be so heavy duty on issues. But right now, if you even go some other paths and ignore what's happening, you're kind of falling right into the pattern that they want you to fall into, where nothing to see here, nothing to talk about. Let's just get back in our vacuums of our own lives and let business be conducted the way that we're intending it to go down. And a lot of that attitude is the reason we're in trouble right now. We have become a collective group of ostriches with our head firmly in the sand. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and everything will just be okay. Just trust our great leaders. So I can't do that. I don't want to get typecast as some kind of rabble-rouser who's always up in arms about something. But there's things that you need to know that may have escaped your attention as you pursue your lives. And that's what I'm here for. So let's get into that on this particular episode. The first thing I want to say is I have been very hard on this particular individual since the beginning of this series and long before. There is no one in media, on television, who has a forum and a platform who is less qualified and more outrageously stupid than Joy Behar, the bitter old bag on The View, who comes on each and every week and spews all kinds of nonsensical things. There's no way. She's been suspended a couple of times for even stepping over that far left show's boundaries. And what she said last week, at the end of the week on the show, about the people we talked about last week in Ohio, in East Palestine, who have now been given this terrible burden of dealing, not just now, but long term, with this toxic chemical spill from a derailment in their town on February the 3rd. So it's been a long time now, 23 days, I guess, since that happened. And finally, Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, showed up there last week. I think maybe because Donald Trump came and was passing out water and patting people on the back and being supportive of the plight they're going through and understanding and listening to what they had to say. That's more than the current president has done. He didn't show up on President's Day in East Palestine. No, he showed up in Ukraine to pal around with his buddy Zelensky, the president of that particular country. Remember, Joe was in charge under the Obama administration of Ukrainian policy, and he used that to his advantage. He got his son, Hunter, an appointment to Burisma Energy, which is controlled by some of the worst actors in all the world stage. And, Hunter Biden had no experience whatsoever in any aspect of energy or Ukrainian policy, but for just being ready to serve and getting an appointment thanks to Joe Biden's encouragement of the people that he was in charge of U.S. policy over, Hunter knocked down a salary of $86,000 a month for coming to an occasional board meeting and contributing absolutely nothing except for his last name. How many of you could slide by on $86,000 a month? Do some quick math. That's over $1 million a year for a do-nothing job. Again, your qualifications are BIDEN, the Biden Crime Syndicate. And, the big guy always was cut in for at least 10%. And if you read Hunter's emails and a lot of his communications with people that he knew, he did constant complaining in that correspondence on his now recovered laptop that he's always having to spend half of his money supporting pops, paying for his houses. Supposedly, when Hunter was living in Delaware at the Biden home, his dad, he was being charged $50,000 a month rent. I got to tell you, if my sons come and want to stay at my house, I'm not going to charge them any rent, and especially not going to suggest that they shell over $50,000. So there's something rotten in Denmark, or in this case, Delaware, and it is this whole Biden thing. But I got off the subject, as I frequently do, if you listen to Need to Know. I was talking about Joy Behar and what she said last week, and she said, I have to say something. Anybody in East Palestine, Ohio, that's suffering right now, I won't say you deserve it, but you asked for it because you repeatedly voted for Donald Trump. And it's Trump's fault. It's exclusively his fault, this derailment and these chemicals that were spilled, because when he was president, he appointed, get ready for this is what a hard-hitting expert she is, he appointed some guy to the EPA that had beliefs that chemicals should not be controlled that are being transported around the country. So some guy who she had no idea who that was, obviously somebody said that to her, and she reached the conclusion that the people in eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania deserve this because they voted for Donald Trump, and they did in overwhelming numbers in both elections, better than 70%, because these are blue-collar, middle-income, mostly Caucasian voters, many who have had their jobs taken away because they were coal miners or other manufacturing kind of folks, that their jobs have been eliminated. There's not any real manufacturing going on in our country right now, which is a shame. I can give you a quick example. I went with my son who just bought a new home. He had to buy a refrigerator. We went to a Lowe's, and he had done a lot of work, as he typically does, tutorials and things about what to look for. And they recommended 5 or 6 different brands and said, and again, this was no politically motivated or ideological website. This was a tutorial on the best equipment you can buy. And the recommendation is buying American-made products made actually in the continental U.S. We went down a line of 7 or 8 different brands of refrigerators, all with American company names: Whirlpool, Amana, GE, KitchenAid, I don't know, Maytag. They were all represented there. But as he opened the refrigerator and looked inside, the little label that stuck inside, every single solitary one was made, all these American companies, was made in Mexico. And that's why so many people in that part of the country, in what's called the Rust Belt, are out of a job right now, because so many manufacturing plants have been shipped by big American companies to places where labor is much cheaper and production costs are much less. And of course, the mining industry has been absolutely shut down by first the Obama administration, and then immediately all the good that Trump did when he came in to restore coal mining and energy production in lots of different places, particularly eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania. With a stroke of a pen, Joe Biden struck all of that down, because any policies, even if they were phenomenally successful, that Donald Trump put into place had to go. It was a fire sale the first day in the White House for Biden and his handlers, the people that are actually pulling the strings of this puppet. Anything Trump instituted had to be completely taken away, discontinued, wiped off the books, because if Trump was responsible, it's a bad thing. So that is the situation in that part of the country. Joy Behar is suggesting these people deserve what they're getting because they voted for Donald Trump. Now, how does she continue to get away with saying things like that? Even the usually robotic audience on The View who claps whenever Joy or Whoopi, aka Karen Johnson. Whoopi Goldberg is really, her name is Karen Johnson. That's interesting in its own right, but they say outrageous things. Sonny, one of the other co-hosts, it's just become, Barbara Walters recently passed away. She wanted to have a show that was a forum for a lot of different ideas, and it has evolved into the ultimate left-wing bitch fest. And I'm not talking about the people individually, I'm talking about the content. But that's all it is just promoting left-wing causes and just denigrating and trashing anybody who doesn't agree with them. And it's sad, but even when Joyless Behar said that on The View last week, the audience was hushed for a few minutes, like looking at each other like, are we supposed to applaud this? Because that was just an outrageous statement. I said on my radio show a couple of years ago, somebody called and was talking about, I don't know what the subject was, but New York City came up. And I visited, of course, the Big Apple many times in my career and had the opportunity to do some projects and some work there. And, it's a great American city. It's just has history at every turn. It's got very interesting things to see and do. I mean, it's the Big Apple. It's the city that never sleeps. I said on my show, I said, you know what? I would really like to go back to New York City, but there's a 1 in 8 million chance, which is the basic population, that I will run into Joy Behar in New York. And I just don't like those odds. So this is a long-standing frustration I've had. And a lot of times when she gets in trouble, the official quote is, well, Joy is on the panel because of her career as a former comedian. Well, I'm not really aware of that career, and I cannot imagine Joy Behar being referred to as an entertainer and a comedian. That's just a real stretch for me. And other comedians don't get away with saying things now. There's just been a attack on the comedy industry. A lot of the well-established legends in comedy would not even be able to perform now because they would be canceled immediately, because no one should be exempt from parody and comedy. But in this era, of course, everybody's shocked and offended when everybody says something, except for Joy Behar. So I thought I needed to start the show out. If you missed that last week, it's on YouTube. Go and watch that. It is absolutely stunning. These people have nothing to complain about because they voted for Donald Trump, so they're getting what they deserve. Of course, any Trump appointee in any level of government is long gone with the advent of the Biden administration. As I mentioned, everything Trump must go. And Pete Buttigieg is the Department of Transportation Secretary. There are over 1,000 train derailments in the 3 years of the 2 years, and we're well on pace for a third. If you're the Secretary of Transportation, isn't that a little bit of a concern for you that we've got trains derailing everywhere? The tracks are in disrepair, that railroads are pumping so much money into the coffers of these particular officials and parties that their regulations and restrictions and requirements are being lax, and they are running with skeleton crews to increase profits. I think that's probably a better way to judge what's happening with different mishaps and derailments than blaming Donald Trump, who's lived at Mar-a-Lago and has not been president in over 2 years. He still gets the blame when anything goes wrong, and when anything of his policies that have managed to remain kick in and go right, the Biden administration takes total credit. They tell Joe, go out there and say what a great job you're doing, because Joe, you're awesome. Joe's surrounded by the ultimate cheerleading staff that keeps him pumped up. And poor Joe doesn't know the difference. He just goes out and reports and says what he's told and reads on the teleprompter, or at least tries to read what they want him to say. So that's the situation. Like it or not, that's just the way it is. The other thing that I really wanted to focus on today is news that was just breaking yesterday that I hope most of you saw. And basically, that involved the Wall Street Journal today running a story that said, okay, get ready for this. If you've been listening, need to know this will be shocking because I've only told you this 1,500 times in the little less than a year I've been on the air here on TKR. The Wall Street Journal story, got to take a deep breath before I tell you. The story says, Wuhan laboratory leak likely cause for COVID-19. Really? Wow, that is some interesting cutting edge stuff. I wonder in 1912 when the Titanic sunk and in the North Atlantic Ocean, I wonder if a couple of years later there was a front page story in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post that said iceberg may have caused sinking of Titanic. Or let's go back all the way to the 1860s when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in Ford's Theater in Washington. A couple years later, do you think a story broke that shot to the back of the head may have killed President Lincoln? Or in 1941, December 7th, the headlines a couple of years later, Japanese bombers may have caused massive damage at Pearl Harbor. That's how ridiculous and obvious this headline is, because anybody with a functioning brain knows exactly where this COVID-19 virus came from. It came from the Wuhan laboratory that was funded, gain of function research in that lab, messing with coronaviruses, aviary viruses, introducing genetic compounds to those. And it was supposedly to anticipate what nature might naturally evolve into eventually, so we could be, quote, prepared with vaccinations, unquote, and treatments for those situations. But the bottom line is the scientists who have gone against the ideology and the just parroting of their colleagues of saying, this is very likely a natural phenomenon caused by a bat that got spread around. There's a strong group of scientists that have said from the beginning, this introduction of this protein spike into these coronaviruses is not something that's going to happen in the natural environment. It was clearly engineered. Anybody who has any common sense can see that and understand that. And the rest of the headline was that accidentally leaked from the Wuhan lab. That's the question in the headline I'm asking, is the word accidentally. Was it accidental, or is it what I maintained, a plandemic? That this situation had gotten so out of hand, Trump gaining strength, getting ready to be reelected in 2020. The American economy had bounced back. So many things had gotten shored up after the Obama administration. The border was completely under control and secure for the first time in a number of years. There were jobs galore. Everything looked like a bright outlook. Okay, people did not like Donald Trump or his style. Admittedly, he is an arrogant, self-centered individual who said and did things that he probably should not have done. People said he's just not presidential. But again, I always maintain Donald Trump was not running for Miss Congeniality at the time. He was running to be the leader of the free world, and going to Europe and telling those guys, hey, look, we're tired of paying for NATO. It's for your protection, and you've got to start ponying up your fair share. He pulled us out of the stupid Paris Climate Accord, which basically was a group of world nations that said, okay, the solution to global warming and climate change is America ponying up about $1.5 billion a year. Oh, by the way, China, India, you're the biggest polluters on the earth, but you don't have to pay anything because you are both, quote, developing nations. The worst deal of all time. He pulled us out of the Iran deal, which supposedly was going to check their development of nuclear weapons. Of course, there was a little caveat to that. We were not allowed to send in inspectors. There was no verifying that what they were supposedly getting in on for what we were supposedly getting on our end of that agreement. But there was massive financial rewards that the Americans coughed up in that accord, giving them back a bunch of their frozen assets, billions of dollars, to the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world. And that was rescinded. All of those things reversed under the Biden administration. But still, Donald Trump, it's his fault that we had a train derailment and a chemical spill in Ohio 2 years after he left the White House. It's not very hard, folks, to apply common sense and look at events sequentially. And throughout history, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes or Inspector Clouseau or Columbo to put facts together and come up with logical conclusions. And that's all I do. I don't claim to be smarter than anybody else. I'm not intellectually superior. I just look at the whole situation of these stories, and it's really easy to piece together. And the basic clues are the same as they've been since the beginning of time. You've got to ask yourself a couple questions anytime something happens. Who benefits? And follow the money. And in this case, the pandemic, who benefits? The progressive left, who is pushing for the socializing of the United States. They believe that free enterprise and market economies and individual liberty are all foolhardy outings of wasted time. And these are Ivy League educated elites. They know better than you because they went to Harvard. They went to Princeton. They know everything about everything. And you are just a sheep that needs to follow them and trust them and believe in your government. Ask the folks of East Palestine right now, as they can still smell chemicals in the air. They are seeing just ridiculous thousands of frogs and fish that in the waterways surrounding this spill have come up to the surface and died. But they're saying all is well. The air is clean. The water's fine. Let me just ask, how many of those officials have poured themselves a nice tall glass of water out of the faucet and down that in front of the cameras since all this began? You can't shrug and stick your head in the sand and trust a government that is so politicized and so ideological that it has really infested all of these departments that are supposed to be overseeing aspects for the good of the American people, because that's not what it's about anymore. And I can't say it enough, and I say it all the time. Republican, Democrat, that's not what this is about. This is about the elites who think they know better, and you, the American people, who they think they should be making decisions for because you're not capable of making them yourself. A great example, when Donald Trump went to Helsinki during his administration and came out for a joint press conference with Putin, the Russian president, the press's first question, and it was a leading question to try to trap Trump, and it was, did you all discuss the Russian collusion in the 2016 election? Trump said, I asked him point blank, did you interfere in our election? And if you did, you need to knock it off. And Putin absolutely denied any involvement, had said he had nothing to gain by the result of the election, which makes sense because Hillary, bend over backwards if you'll give us a couple $1 million for our foundation. Clinton was the opponent. People, ask yourself the question, why would Vladimir Putin favor Donald Trump to be president, a hard ass who was going to make them toe the line, over Hillary Clinton, who was just in it for no ideological purpose, but just for the money? And people absolutely jumped to the conclusion, well, Trump must be a Russian agent. And the whole Russian collusion nonsense started which on day one, way back in 2017, I declared an absolute fraud and a hoax. And it really galls me now when Sean Hannity comes on his show on Fox News and says, we had that right from the beginning. Well, they didn't start talking about it till 2018. Our show, our little local radio show in Birmingham, The Ride Home, we had it dead cold and gave all of the examples of why that was the case way back in the day. So just a little sidebar there. And again, it's not being smarter than anybody. I don't consider myself elite, but I do consider myself well-informed, and I do put 2 and 2 together. And sometimes you got to put 2 and 2 more together. It makes 8 if you do it that way. And it makes things clear cut. It's who benefits and follow the money. One other quick example. I remember back years ago that Tonya Harding was the top U.S. figure skating woman and the Olympic favorite until Nancy Kerrigan from Boston came along and started beating her in the U.S. competitions. And remember, she comes off the ice a couple months before the Olympics in a public rink after doing a practice session, and some goon comes up with a tire iron and swings like a baseball bat and smashes her knee, breaking her kneecap just 6 weeks before the Olympics were starting. And I said that night to my wife, I said, really, there's no explanation for this. Why would some rando come in and attack Nancy Kerrigan with a tire iron? Who benefits? There's only one person, and follow the money, Tonya Harding. And Tonya Harding's, it turns out, her just despicably sleazy husband at the time, Jeff Gillooly, had hired this guy. His name was Sean. I forgot his last name. But it was a friend of his and paid him like hardly any money at all to go and do that because they were trying to knock Nancy Kerrigan out of the box so Tonya Harding would become the gold medal favorite and also, of course, be able to cash in on countless endorsements and other opportunities. And my wife at the time said, she wouldn't have anything to do with that. That's ridiculous. Well, of course, it didn't take long for that plot of morons to unravel. And sure enough, it was Gillooly's man that did this. And I remember my wife saying, that is unbelievable that you knew that the first 5 minutes. And I said, it was just obvious. And if you just think about things, so many times, things that seem mysterious and inexplicable are really not, because that's the basic formula of figuring out exactly what's going on. So my message today is get involved, get your head out of the sand, and do not let them intimidate you. Remember what Saul Alinsky said in the Radical's Handbook. Our best weapon is ridicule. And they have done a masterful job of making people uncomfortable. I was with a bunch of guys in Atlanta this week, and we're talking about a lot of these issues. And most of them are pretty like-minded, but there's just a hesitance to even talk out loud in public about things that are blatantly obvious because you may be typecast or stamped as some kind of malcontent. You can't talk about the election having just ridiculously puzzling things that are hard to explain. The pandemic, of course, played right into that because the rules in the 2020 election were completely altered to basically allow massive ballot harvesting and huge crates of ballots to be dropped off. There was no accountability. If somebody voted late in the early voting process and came right back and voted at the poll, it was too overwhelming and too much numbers to even control that. People may have voted as many as 15 or 20 times. And so many of the ballots that were just delivered out of the blue, how many of those were inaccurate? But they did a brilliant job of saying every vote must be counted. And anybody who disputed that was immediately labeled some kind of conspiratist. So just things to think about. I know this is a lot of information we're throwing at you today, but I just want to keep throwing out examples of things that you need to go, wait a minute, he might have a point there. In this case, I hope you readily gather that there is a lot to be gained in thinking for yourself, because the Wall Street Journal report this week that Wuhan lab leak may have caused accidental leak, I'm sorry, may have caused COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, Captain Obvious, whoever wrote the story at the Wall Street Journal and whatever source from the Department of Energy gave them that story. That is not too shocking to hear when it's been pretty much anybody with a functioning brain's opinion since the day it happened. The question again is, was it accidental or was it perfectly timed to create economic chaos and societal disarray in the West and advance the globalist desire to make us one happy kumbaya universe with the elites leading the way and showing us and telling us what we can and cannot do, think, and say. And that's what's happening right now. And every American should be up in arms. And anybody who supports the Democrat Party who's thrown in with these people are also getting under the tent flap with a lot of people who want to destroy this country. I'm not saying this as some kind of wild conspiracy theorist or right-wing ideologue. I'm telling you from a common sense perspective, that's what we're witnessing right now. This is the great conflict, and it's well underway. I'm going to try to go a little bit later next week with maybe some other topic of things of interest, but I had to get all this in this week with everything that's happening and the shocking Wall Street Journal story that this may not have been a natural phenomenon. No kidding. I'm Kip Keefer. I certainly appreciate you being on board. Do not miss our new show, Keefer and Kurre, which is doing some great topics. We're focusing on different things of interest, both in the sports and entertainment and perhaps even the political world. We're just kind of got a blank canvas and we're just painting. Such an honor to be affiliated with Tony on that program. We'll have another episode coming up this week, so keep your eye out for that. I'm Kip Keefer. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next week on Need to Know.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Curry Radio.